In our last session, we took some time to unpack again Matthew 5 verse 8 that says, blessed are the pure in heart. And that sense of getting pure actually is about getting clean. And we looked again at the importance of staying clean and how when we've worked really hard to get free, we're allowed to enjoy that freedom and enjoy our relationship with God, our relationship with other people. Jesus wants us to have life and life to the full, and repairing the damage is to allow us to live life to the full. When we become a new person, it's time to celebrate. It's time to celebrate the change, enjoy the fruits of that, and share the love. And when we come to the final beatitude, which is blessed are those who are persecuted because of righteousness, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven, we start to move into this sense of actually what do we do with the victory that we now have. The emphasis of this beatitude picks up two of our previous principles that have shaped our journey so far. The first one is the idea of righteousness, and we've already looked at the idea that righteousness is about having right standing, that having got clean and got pure, we then have a right standing and we can have right relationships. We coming to this place of where we've become clean, we have a new identity. And the kingdom of heaven, it takes us right back to the very first of the Beatitudes, where we've got these bookends that if we begin the process and we end the process, the promise here is that we will inherit the kingdom of heaven. In other words, the destiny of our journey is to enjoy relationship with God, to be part of the family of God, to be able to know that we have an eternity that is secure, a future eternity beyond this life, beyond our dreams. And that is the goal of getting right with God. Getting ourselves clean and pure allows us to be able to enjoy being part of the family of God. Now we've done this work, now we've cleaned out the rubbish, now we've put these tools in place, we've built our plans, we've got a stable spiritual and emotional platform to move into life. It's time to live out our new identity and our new position. And often when we find ourselves in recovery sessions, we would talk when we get to this stage about the idea of giving back. Matthew 10 verse 8 says, give as freely as you've received. And so Jesus' heart is that we give away what we have. He said, go and make disciples of all nations. Actually, there's an impetus that's given to us that once we become right with God, he wants us to share that with other people. Hence, blessed are those who are persecuted for righteousness. Because if you've got right standing and you start to share that, you will come under attack. In our cycle of change, this brings us to the final part, which is actually to celebrate and enjoy the change. And what I want to talk about in this session today is the idea of rebranding our identity or rebranding our story. The change stage of the change cycle is about recognizing our need to live in our new identity and to share the success for other people's benefit. But how do we do that? How do we rebrand our story? How do we live in that new identity in a way that, to pick up an old-fashioned word, is so winsome that it wins other people to want to experience that freedom for themselves? Maybe just to help explain this a little bit more, what do I mean when I talk about rebranding our identity? I'm really talking here about living in the new identity that we have and choosing not to wear our old identity. A number of years back, I was in a meeting, a conference, where I was listening to some people who were talking about people recovering from alcohol and substance misuse. And somebody had mooted the idea of creating a housing estate as a recovery housing estate where everybody who was in recovery could live together in this housing estate. And I remember somebody who was very senior within Public Health England, who was a champion of recovery. I remember listening and talking with him as he was horrified with this idea, because in effect what you were doing was creating a recovery ghetto. Real recovery doesn't come when you just get rid of the old. Real recovery comes when you embrace the new. You know, I often come across people who are a dry drunk. You know, somebody who's been alcoholic, who's stopped drinking, but still has all the old behaviours and habits of the alcoholic. You know, the drug addict who's no longer taking the drugs, but still wants instant gratification for everything in life. You know, you see people living with the identity of the old, and they've just exchanged one habit, one addiction, for another. You know, I've watched people get free of drugs and alcohol and become addicted to pornography. The danger is that, you know, we sweep out the house, we have to replace it with something healthy. But it's also about living out that new identity that we have. And 2 Corinthians 5 says that we are a new creation. And it goes on to say that that new creation is actually an ambassador. You know, we are now ambassadors for the King. We're part of the kingdom of heaven. We've been accepted into the family of God. And we now have a message to carry as an ambassador. And that message is a message of reconciliation. We need to live out what we've learned, the success. Jesus has invited us to live life to the full. I believe as Christians, we should be the life and the soul of the party. We should be the happiest people around. We should be the people who can be trusted more in the workplace than anybody else, because we have discovered what it means to truly live as sons and daughters of God. I really genuinely think we should be fun people to be around. You know, there's nothing worse than a miserable Christian who goes, well, woe is me, Jesus has saved me, but I can't do this and I can't do that, and I live out of everything that I can't do. Jesus has saved us for life, and actually it's time to live life to the full and to celebrate our success, and to do that in a healthy way. We grow stronger the more we live out healthy lives. But it's important to then recognise that our integrity will also be challenged. You know, we will live with that sense of the potential of being undermined, and we'll come back to that in a little while. I think the difficulty we have is that for many people, we think that we've lived such ordinary, boring lives that we don't have a story to tell. If you've worked this program, if you've known Jesus set you free from something in your life that you've lived with for years, you now have a story to tell. You have something to be able to say, I once was, but now I am. And you have a story to tell. So, if we now have a story to tell, how do we rebrand our identity? How do we rebrand our story? And it is time to live with that true perspective of the place that we now have in the kingdom of heaven. We've been accepted and healed. And it's time to use a technique that often we would use, which is called rescripting. But actually, when we have a recurring memory of something that's causing us damage, you know, maybe it's a recurring nightmare of something that happened to us, it's time to rescript that. And one of the techniques I know my wife uses is to get people to imagine what happened and to rewrite the story. And if you have ever experienced a nightmare, then sometimes rescripting the story is actually a way of breaking the power of that nightmare. Another way to approach it is to live with an attitude of gratitude. You know, those who've been forgiven much, forgive much. Those who've been loved much, love much. You know, with the measure you use, it will be measured to you. Actually, if we've received that healing, it's time to live with that attitude of gratitude, that, you know what, we've cleared out the rubbish, we've come to a good place, and I am so grateful and I am so thankful. Joseph has a great example to us, and when you look at the life of Joseph, here is this arrogant teenager who lacks all the emotional intelligence of somebody who says things that are just so offensive to his family that they grow up hating him. And his brothers end up throwing him into slavery and telling Dad that he was killed. Joseph goes into slavery in Egypt, and ends up being falsely accused of rape and thrown into prison for years and years. Now, in prison, the gifts that God has given him, he uses those and he finds favour. And he uses his spiritual gifts to interpret the dreams of the butler and the baker. And one of them dies and one of them is restored. And his interpretation of the dreams is true, but they forget him. And consequently, he spends more years in prison that he didn't need to spend. You know, it'd be very easy to develop a sense of bitterness, a sense of if only, a sense of if poor old me. But in that place of being locked up and having to go through this time of testing, God's working on Joseph's character. And so when the moment comes for Joseph to step up and interpret Pharaoh's dream and become the second most powerful person in the kingdom, his identity has been redefined. That teenage, arrogant young man with no emotional intelligence is now sensitive and in the king's palace. And one day he gets confronted with his brothers, these people who sold him into slavery, who did him so much wrong. And he's seeing his own dreams being fulfilled before his eyes as they bow down before him. And he's got a choice at this moment of saying, well, you know, how the cookie has crumbled, you know, how the situation's turned around. I can now get my revenge. I can now get my own back. You know, I can now lord it over my brothers and claim, you know, see, I was right all along. Told you so. But all of that work that's been done on his character and healing up all those bad areas of his life means that he takes a totally different approach. And in Genesis 50, he says these famous words, "You intended to harm me, but God intended it all for good." And he was able to rewrite the story to actually put it into a different perspective. We've been victorious, so don't waste the experience of your journey. You've been on a journey, you can now use that journey to benefit other people. You now have experience. And part of rescripting or rebranding our experiences are something that I often find myself talking to. Most of us have gone through life, and at times we've been wounded. At times things have been done to us or by us that have left us with scars, physically or emotionally. And I want us to think about those scars for a moment. Because when we look at those scars, it's very tempting to look at them and they're a reminder of what went wrong. We look at that scar and we go, you know, that's when I hurt that other person. That scar there was when I spoke nastily to that person. That scar there was where I held a regret. That scar there was where I made the wrong choice. That scar there was where I was addicted to whatever. And it's very easy to look at them and they're reminders of what went wrong. But I want us to rescript and rebrand those scars, because I believe that they are actually scars of experience. Every time you look at one of those scars, they're a scar of experience because you have come through the situation successfully. You are now a new person, and that scar speaks of the experience you learned through that. I often say to people at work, the only people who don't make mistakes are people who don't do anything. And actually we learn more through our mistakes than we ever do our successes, because they burn something psychologically into our emotions, an emotional memory that's so strong that actually it says, okay, I want to do something different because of that bad memory. So the scar is actually a scar of experience, not a scar of defeat. It's a badge of honour, because you got knocked down 9 times, but you got up 10 times. You have overcome. You're wearing the scars that say you are an experienced warrior who has the scars to show your experience. That you might have got wounded, but you were victorious. You overcame. It's a sign of victory. It's like you've been given a medal. You know, if you were in a war and you went through a battle, you were given a medal for successfully coming through that battle. You know, it's a reward and a recognition of the success. And your scars are medals of honour that now give you a story to tell somebody else. Is it time to rescript or rebrand your experiences? So how do we rebrand our story? Well, I want to introduce you to what I call the 4 P's approach. And quite simply, the 4 P's are this. First of all, prepare. I've always found that the best form of spontaneity is preparation. Many people would say, when I'm put on the spot, I never know what to say. Well, that's where preparation comes in. Prepare your story. Know how you will tell your story. Look at it and say, what is appropriate for me to share and not appropriate for me to share? You know, if there are other people in your story, you might want to protect their identity. Preparing how we are going to tell our story means that we don't have to suddenly make it up on the spot with not a sense of having to have that fast thinking mind. For many of us, we need to prepare in advance because the best form of spontaneity is preparation. Secondly, I'd ask us to pray. Pray for the opportunity to share your story. It's amazing how many more opportunities we see when we're praying for them. It's almost like praying for the opportunity lifts up our horizon, lifts up our gaze, and our eyesight changes and we start to recognise the opportunities when they come along. But position yourself for service as well. You know, it's important that we put ourselves into positions of being available. I think, you know, many of us have grown up in churches where it seems like it's a consumer culture where people are coming to church saying, what can I get out of this? You know, the pastor's message wasn't good enough for me. You know, I didn't enjoy the worship this morning, or the coffee wasn't strong enough, or there weren't any chocolate biscuits left when I get there. It's very easy for people to be part of a church community and be critical or approach it with a consumer mentality, instead of approaching it with a sense of we're there to serve. You know, the Bible talks so often about the servant-hearted nature of the kingdom. And if we position ourselves for service, then actually you'll be surprised how many more opportunities come your way than if you aren't putting yourself into places where you're available. And finally, protect yourself against attack. When you lift your head over the parapet, you will get shot at. All the time you're stuck and living with your damage, you're not a threat. But once you start to find victory and you start to carry that message to other people that they can be free, you suddenly find yourself coming under attack. You will become a target. The enemy is a roaring lion looking for who he can steal, kill and destroy, who he can devour. And for us, we need to recognise that there will be a challenge on our integrity. That can come in one of 2 ways. It can come because people will say things about us that perhaps aren't true. And it's taken me many years to get to a place of realising what people said to me for years and years, that actually, if you've done nothing wrong, you don't have to defend yourself. Actually, by defending yourself, you're giving credibility, you're giving energy to the accusations. And actually, let God deal with it. Protect yourself from falling into the trap of giving power to the accusations. But the other way our integrity can be challenged is by temptation. We've lived with some of these habits for years and years, and consequently they've become such a normal response for us that it's easy to fall back into the old ways. So if you're telling somebody about how God has set you free from having a temper, and then you lose your temper, it completely undermines your message. Why is it that unfortunately we see so many people who rise up into positions of power who then are discredited because of a lack of moral judgment? You know, we can see people who've been involved in some great moves of God whose character is then revealed where actually there was stuff going on in a secret place, adultery or abuse or different things that are inappropriate. Believe me that your integrity will be challenged if you start to step out. But blessed are you if you're persecuted for righteousness. Recognising that it's time to take control of our story, and how it's told is something that's in our power to do. And the 4 Ps can help us look at how to do that. So we've reached this pinnacle of our journey. We've worked through these 8 Beatitudes. We've broken the power of the issues that we came into this with. And we're now starting to enjoy the freedom that brings to us and being able to live life to the full. We now have a story to be able to tell and to take on. And we know that the enemy will come knocking. There'll be the temptations to fall back into the old ways. There'll be a challenge to our integrity. And we need to make sure we don't give power to that by falling for the old lies, but using the lessons that we've learned and the tools that we have to live in that new freedom. We need to recognise the lie, but actually when the temptation comes back, we recognise it for what it is and go, no, you're defeated. You no longer have power over me. I'm not going to give you the credibility anymore. Blessed are those who are persecuted for righteousness. That's what our Beatitude says. But actually, if you've come to that place of right standing, God wants you to be able to carry that message to other people, that they too can find a new freedom and a new life. Remember, Jesus said he's come that we might have life and life to the full. You know, the enemy wants to steal, kill and destroy. God wants to give us life to the full. So as people who've been set free and are part of the kingdom of heaven, followers of God, disciples of Jesus, we can live life to the full. We should be enjoying life. We should be the life and the soul of the party. We have a message to carry to other people. But because of where other people are at, it is quite likely that the message that you bring will sometimes be rejected. And there will be times where you will be criticised for who you are and for what you're doing. Blessed are you if you're persecuted for righteousness. But remember, when we've come to that place of having clean hands, healthy foundations, we can resist the temptation to go back, and we don't have to take on board those fiery darts that get fired to us. Instead, we can see that we are now part of the kingdom of heaven. You know, blessed are you if you're persecuted for righteousness, for yours is the kingdom of heaven. You now have a place in the family of God for eternity. You now have a secure future. What can the enemy do to you now when you have an eternity that's secure once and for all? Being persecuted for wrongdoing is called justice. And if you've done something wrong, then actually getting punished for it or persecuted for it is actually only what you deserve. But if you've dealt with the issues and you've come to a place of reconciliation and forgiveness, and you now have a right standing because the debt has been paid. Yet Jesus' death on the cross broke the power of sin and the power of death. And he paid the price. And it's like he hangs there on the cross, holding in a black sack all of the things that you've done. The debt has been paid. And if that debt has been paid, you now have a right standing. So blessed are you if you're persecuted because you're celebrating and living life to the full in your new standing. The reward of walking this program is to be in the kingdom of God, living life to the full as a son and daughter of God. Enjoy your freedom.